Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton at Big C Sports, coming to you worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America, also across the pond in London, England, as well as Paris, France. Of course, you good old boys in Canada. We love you in Africa, the Big C tribe. But there's no one we love more than the good old boys down south, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, on a beautiful September the 2nd, 2020. Round of the Deportes, bonjour, Big C. How's it going for you good old boys down south?
Well, Charlton, we've got the official countdown to the NFL season underway. It's just 8 days away, and everybody's sitting on pins and needles in anticipation. I want to thank our frontline healthcare workers, our nurses, our doctors, our first responders, and I know you're sitting on pins and needles every day with the work that you do.
And they're doing a fabulous job. I want to say today's show is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. When you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and Big C sent you, as well as a fleet of Cadillac cars. And also, all around the world, just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing from 3,000 miles away. And I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. You can follow Big C Sports on Spotify. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. But you better have a smart TV, or you'll be sitting there looking at a still picture. Man, I love doing the pause. In fact, I saw Attorneys General doing the pause as he was talking to Wolf Bitzer, and he was pausing like attorneys, but we'll never pause on our Veterans Crisis Hotline, Big C. They really are experienced helping veterans and their loved ones get help. Big C, why is that so important to you?
Well, Charlton, it'd be important if William Barr did as much as we do in thinking about the veterans of this country. You know, they served this country so admirably, and as we think about the 75th anniversary since the end of World War II, Charlton, so many of our veterans have suffered. We give out the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number, Charlton, because we lose some 22 of those veterans a day to suicide. And this is a horrific disease that has been going on for decades. We think about the destitute of many of our veterans, Charlton, being homeless and lack medical care and financial wherewithal. But we give out this number, Charlton, because a lot of those situations have driven those veterans to suicide because they don't think that they have a way out or anybody to assist them.
Yeah.
Our national government, especially our president, pays no attention to our great veterans. I mean, he's stumped for political purposes, but beyond that, he does nothing for their needs and services, Charlton. So we give out the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number, hoping to stem the tide of, suicide in this country.
We'll do the best we can. 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. Or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255. If you're online, simply go to veteranscrisisline.net. That's veteranscrisisline.net, and you can get this some help. Also, very happy to be affiliated with Valley Homes Weekly TV on Dish TV, DirecTV, AT&T Uverse, TV 53, home of the San Francisco Giants and the Say Hey Kid. When you reach out to them, just tell them Big C sent you. Our goal is simple: recruit 10,000 brokers and agents to help put property listings on TV, just like McDonald's does it, car dealerships do it. And yes, sports teams are going to do it too, and they're going to keep increasing no matter what people think. Let real estate and TV work for you. 800-772-8624. That's 800-772-8624. For those of you looking for opportunities in real estate, go to bigcsports.pacwm.com. That's bigcsports.pacwm.com. You know, Big C, I was thinking, I didn't go to bed last night until about 1 o'clock. I was in the garage working out at about 11, and I finished at about 12:30. I got a shower, and I went to bed with the radio on, and I heard a sports show talking about the swing states. I said, Big C started another show without me. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I mean, he was swinging through those states trying to get an opportunity to meet with the commissioner of the Big Ten. The president was trying to get them to start football because he needs those swing states, Charlton, to propel him back into the White House.
Yeah.
And without football, he feels that he has no chance. But if he feels that he can get the Big Ten to play football before the election, Charlton, he can go and say, this is what I'm doing for your economy.
Yeah, he can always say a lot of things, but, you know, it's all fair love and war. I'll tell you, Big C Sports, we really do want to be the new sexy. We want to be clever, want to be engaging, want to be bold, we want to be funny, want to be thoughtful, even provoking. We just want you to Google what we say. If you're doing something and it feels good and you want some more, just Google it. Just say play Big C Sports Podcast. Really appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit more about sports. And your friend William Barr, he always looks like he could go and do some exercise or sit-ups. I mean, it's just everybody does what they want to do. But here's a guy, I thought it was so funny today. I watched some of his interview. He was talking to Wolf Blitzer, and he talked about race and how the Republicans don't think there's a race issue, at least the dishonest ones don't. But he asked Will Barr, Big C, the Attorney General, who said he does not believe that racism exists in the United States, but he says, in some situations, that blacks are treated differently by law enforcement, but he sees no need for police reform. Barr also said that Trump doesn't always believe what Trump says. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, at least he was honest in saying that Trump doesn't always believe what he says. But, I mean, when you look at William Barr, he's an attorney, Charlton, so he's going to speak about the Constitution, and that's the law that he's speaking from. And at that time, there was no racism in America. Yeah,
well, he's talking about now. They were asking about what happened with Blake that was shot 7 times, and he says that there's no racism, but blacks are treated differently. Is that saying the same thing? How does that make sense, Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, anybody can spin on words, and when you look at William Barr, you know, he's going to speak, like I said, from a legal perspective. He's not going to put anything out there that's going to put himself or the administration in jeopardy.
Yeah, well, obviously, I think he did, and we're going to cover some sports too, but I think as we talk about sports and how people use sports as a distraction, and sometimes it can be a distraction, but for people who still read, there was a question asking about, and I'll ask you too, people in the United States, they're really concerned about COVID-19, about 60%. The economy pulled in at 58%. And then racism that Will Barr and Donald Trump says does not exist. 52% of Americans are worried about racism. Black Americans only make up about 12 to 13%. So that 52% means a lot of Americans are concerned about something that Donald Trump and Will Barr do not believe exists. And I think that's part of his problem. He's still running on that Strom Thurmond, Governor Wallace type of campaign to scare suburban white women. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I mean, you got to look at the dog whistles that they continue to throw out there. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, when you hear Trump talk, I mean, there's a different news cycle every week or two about how he's going to change his perspective.
Yeah.
But, you know, he doesn't care about who he scares or whatever. He has his base. That's all he's trying to attend to, and hopefully some other people will come along.
Well, he's about double-digit down in the polls. It's all fair and love and war. I say people get out and vote. And as we always tell you, no matter what you think about Big C Sports or any other program, just make sure you get out and be a part of the solution. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I want to go into the state of Alabama. There were some good old boys in Alabama. Sometimes you can twist somebody's arm and you don't want them to do what you don't want them to do. College sports, University of Alabama administration has sent out threatening emails. You know, when you threaten somebody, Big C, threatening emails, which can be traced to faculty and staff, demanding that they do not speak to the media or the classes about COVID-19 pandemic and the outbreak on campus. One local doctor warned that the whole university could be infected by the end of the fall semester. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, that's not unreal, you know, when you think about how many infections have been on the University of Alabama, and they're not practicing social distancing. We know that they're dying to play football in the SEC. Alabama is the bell cow of the SEC, but administration, it's a Republican state. And when you look at those Republican states that have been pressed to play athletics, Charlton, and put the athletes in peril, you know, this is the undermining this of the president. Having people go out there and do his dirty work for him. But when you think about the administration of a major university in the United States threatening the faculty and staff about speaking about COVID-19, and the perils that it can have on its student body.
Yeah. Well, make sure you get out and vote. Text the word vote to 26797. That's the word vote to 26797, and make your voice heard. And make sure you really get out and do it. Don't just complain. The days of complaining are over, but you got to get out and make some things happen. And whether you feel like the president is pushing somebody or threatening somebody or twisting their arm, there's still grown people, Big C. Colorado, Rocky Mountain, high Colorado. Even the Air Force Academy is up in Colorado Springs. But it's closed its campus for the fall due to COVID-19 pandemic, and all the residence halls have been quarantined. Now, I know this goes into the face of what Donald Trump has been saying, because he's saying there's really not an issue with COVID-19 anymore. So why are they closing the campus, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, this pressing issue of COVID-19 and the seriousness of it, you have these universities, Charlton, that don't want to be responsible for the health and welfare of these young students if their health fails.
Yeah.
And so to close up campus and say we're going to go to online learning has been the proper thing all along. They never should have opened up these campuses, because there's no way you can practice social distancing on a college campus when you look at the tightness of the classrooms that they have, as well as kids moving around through the campus and the dining areas. It's basically impossible. So, as these colleges are going to continue closing up as the school year goes on, because there's no way that they can control this pandemic breakout.
No way that they can, other than just put their head in the sand and hope that it goes away. This garbage about herd immunity hasn't been working in Sweden, Big C, and they even regretted that they tried it.
Herd immunity, if you practice herd immunity, Charlton, that means that at least 2.5 to 3 million people in America have to die for herd immunity. That means if everybody gets COVID-19, there's no way that the hospitals and medical staffs around the country have enough beds and hospital space to care for that many people, Charlton. So people are just going to die. And that's what they're talking about with herd immunity, is that let everybody catch it, and those who survive, they will survive. It's like saying we have a plague and we're not going to treat it. That's the dumbness of our political leaders, Charlton, when they talk about herd immunity. I know there was a doctor out of Stanford, who I think he was a foot doctor, talking about, everybody could, survive herd immunity. But, who wants to see 3 million Americans die, Charlton? We've had 185 million Americans die from COVID-19. That's more than we've had in all the world wars, Charlton.
Yeah,
so you think about that many people have died on American soil. And you got to go back to the words of Donald Trump. He says he's a wartime president. The only thing that's wrong with that, Charlton, he's killing his own people.
Yeah, actually 185,000, Big C, 185,000 have lost their life so far that we know of. And some doctors think it's closer to 200,000. They just don't want to tell everybody, because POTUS said don't. There's a guy, and I know football is going to happen, because a lot of people everybody thinks differently. I've always thought that from the beginning. But when you look at an NFL football player, his name is Kirk Cousins. He's a quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. Never been to the Super Bowl. I think he's only won one playoff game. He didn't win it. They pushed off down in New Orleans, and they gave him a win. But he says something that I thought was very stupid. And if you're the ownership of the Minnesota Vikings, and you said this guy is your franchise player, and you want to pay him more money than anybody, I think $84 million guaranteed, and he says that he doesn't care if he gets COVID-19, that he's going to live his life no matter what, and, he affects other people too, because there's other people around him, not only for the team, but in the state of Minnesota. So how do you have your franchise marquee player going against even the NFL's protocol, saying, if I die, I die? That doesn't make any sense for a guy that's going to be the head of your organization. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I beg the difference on you on that thought process, because when you think about what Kirk Cousins said, he said basically what 90% of the NFL players are thinking. They didn't hesitate in going back to training camp. They didn't hesitate in starting up the season. Kirk Cousins just came out and spoke about it. That's all he did. But when you poll the NFL players, they want to play football. They understand the physical risk that they're taking with COVID-19 and going out there playing. You saw where the NFL just a week and a half ago said, no, you can't say that 77 players were positive on 11 different teams. You have to come back and say that was a false negative. But just a couple of days ago, they came back and showed 5 players from 5 different teams testing positive still. So the NFL has the position that Kirk Cousins had. Kirk Cousins just came out and spoke about it in a different language.
Yeah.
He didn't know how to clean it up and be politically correct about it. He just spoke from his heart. So what Kirk Cousins said is the true thinking of many NFL players. Otherwise, they would not have gone to training camp.
Yeah, I think that may be the case. Some guys do believe it's que sera, sera, and they live for now and don't worry about the other people. But it's still, when you have almost 200,000 Americans that lost their lives, it's not about him dying. It's the people that he contaminates. And I know some people are flippant about that too. But everybody has their own opinion.
Look at the NFL players. They got doctors around, Charlton. They got the best of medical care.
Yeah.
So the way that they live their life is going to be different than the layman person on the street. They get tested several times a week.
Yep.
When you think about NFL rosters versus an American citizen now can't even go in and get a test even though you're feeling the symptoms of COVID-19. The White House has had that process eliminated from anybody can get a test anytime.
Yeah, well, he definitely has a right to his opinion, but I would hate to get on an airplane where the pilot says, I don't care if I die. If I die, I die. All aboard? I mean, that's make any sense. Kansas City Chiefs, they have a guy by the name of Patrick Mahomes, and he's engaged to a longtime girlfriend, so I wish him nothing but the best. But they also received their Super Bowl rings. Kansas City Chiefs quarterback, he also gave a ring away to he's 24 years old, has a whole life ahead of him. I don't advise anybody, but I'm not a marriage counselor, but why not wait until you're 30? Especially when you have $1 billion wealthy. But everybody, I guess love is blind, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I mean, when you look at somebody who has been with you all this time while you were in college and even your early years as a professional, you understand when you have a life partner. And that's what marriage is all about. It's not about waiting till you're 30. You can be 20. And you figure out this person is the one that you want to be with. We live in a society now where everybody wants to go out freelance all the time, but with all the perils that are out there in society, social diseases and everything else,
yeah,
you're better down to just hunker down with one person and ride it out. And that's what Patrick Mahomes is going to do. I mean, if this is what makes him happy, no one has an opportunity to make any insights on how he feels and how she feels.
Yeah. They
made a decision about their future to be together. That's what partnerships are.
Yeah, well, I wish them nothing but the best with that union, and I know sometimes maybe I follow Donald Trump too much, so, but it's all fair level war. I also want to bring up, it's not that it's sad, but in Northern California, we only have one professional football team, and it used to be that way. And ironically for the 49ers, when the 49ers were the only team in Northern California, that's when they won most of their Super Bowls, Big C. The Raiders went down to L.A. and then came back, and the 49ers became the kings of the Bay Area. Maybe even the kings of all of California. The Raiders have now gone to Las Vegas. But I think about this. The Black Lives Matter stance really happened with Carlos down at the Mexico Olympics. But when you think about Colin Kaepernick, how he made attention that people said, oh, you're anti-military, get out of the country. Black Lives Matter flag flies in San Francisco. I know you're a big proponent of not putting it on the ground, but having it fly. They've been flying it down there at Levi Stadium for some time, right in between the California flag and the American flag. And it's amazing how, at least lately, the movement started with Colin Kaepernick, and the organization that wouldn't even give him a job, they at least put the flag up. Big C, your thoughts?
I think that's totally hypocritical, Charlton, because you use blasphemy against the guy who tried to explain to you what he was taking a stance for and how it affected black lives in America, even in the Bay Area where he was playing football.
Yeah.
And you're saying that he was a discrimination to you and he was anti-military, anti-American, that black lives didn't matter. How can you say 4 years later that black lives matter to your organization where they didn't 4 years ago, and you got rid of a guy who had just recently taken you to a Super Bowl?
Yeah.
I think it's totally hypocritical of the organization.
So do I. He helped them get to a Super Bowl, and a lot of people complained they didn't like his tattoos. They didn't like he had afros. And there was some media said they don't like his cornrows, the way he did wear his hair. They didn't like anything about him other than that he could help them win football games. And it's just ironic that organization treated him like Donald Trump treated black athletes, but they put up a flag, and I guess that makes everything all fair. But it's all fair in the love and war. I think the 49ers says, it takes time for Americans to examine their own thoughts. And there's no perfect people on the planet. We all have a chance to learn from our mistakes and go forward. But I just wonder how Colin Kaepernick feels when he looks at that flag flying over the stadium, and that's the same team that told him, get the hell out. They didn't stand behind him, but they put up a flag, and I thought that was kind of a slap in the face, but I can't complain. Again, America, text VOTE to 26797. Tell all your friends Big C in the NFL said vote. You got to do it now. Vote now as if your life depends on it. And make sure that you vote in the swing states. Make this the biggest vote in the history of the universe. Really looking forward to things happening. There's something that happened also, Big C, and I'm part of it too. Not that I blame myself or not that I don't blame myself, but I know sometimes if we don't take the chance to examine ourselves, then we can make the same mistakes that other people have, toward African Americans. So I'm always trying to examine myself too. But I've said many times that sports and politics, that it does mix. And I know that it does. And it seems like every program that we hear about today, it's about sports and politics. There's 4 members of Congress, the people who set law. They set law. Maybe they follow Big C Sports. 4 members of Congress. They question the NFL on concussion payments. There's 4 members that sent letters to the NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell on Wednesday, questioning the league's formula for making concussion settlement payments to former black players. Not white guys, but former black players. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat Oregon, Cory Booker, Democrat New Jersey, Representative Yvette Clarke, Democrat New York, and Maxine Waters, Democrat California. When Congress is getting involved with making sure that athletes are treated well, no one can ever tell me ever again that sports and politics does not mix. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, they can question the league, but they can't enforce any rules on the league. Congress sends out letters to many organizations all the time. The NFL is basically an autonomous zone, Charlton, where zero tolerance is there, and no one can infiltrate that. We see that every time they go into lawsuits in court.
Yeah.
They settle so that people can't get any injection into what they have financially. Congress can write all the letters and things that they want to the NFL, but they're going to get zero out of it in response. That's where the NFL is. You can question any settlement that the NFL makes, but unless, as Congress, you're taking the NFL to court, good luck. When the NFL puts money out there, that's the money that everybody agrees to. The NFL, the Players Association, all of those people agree to that settlement, and then it's dispersed from that point.
Well, I know it's all the conversation, and that some people don't even think the conversation could happen, like stay out of sports or stay out of politics. It's just nice to see when lawmakers get behind things. I want to ask you something, because I know you and I talk about West Coast versus Southern football. I think we play the best football out here in the West Coast. I think you guys cheat a little bit better when it goes down south.
Are they playing football out there on the West Coast?
No, we read, Big C.
I guess if you're sitting in the locker room that's playing football West Coast style.
No, we read. We read when we send our kids to school, Big C. College football. Iowa State reverses course on fans' attendance, and no fans permitted to attend an opener less than 2 days after announcing that they will allow up to 25,000 spectators for their September 12th matchup. I think it's Louisiana versus Iowa State, and has reversed its course entirely. The school announced Wednesday that it will no longer allow fans at its home opener amid the COVID-19 pandemic. However, they will allow the players. That makes sense to you, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, they have no concern about the safety of the players. But if you look at Iowa as a state, Charlton, it has had a huge breakout of COVID-19.
I know
we know that the University of Iowa is not going to play. They're in the Big Ten. Iowa State is in the Big 12. And you look at Ames, Iowa, it's not that far away from the University of Iowa. So I don't understand the reasoning in the state that the governor doesn't step up and say, okay, if one major university, the landmark university in the state is not playing, how does the other university play in the state, Charlton? And so that baffles me right there. But, they've taken the stance to understand that COVID-19 is serious. They're not going to allow the fans in the stands.
Yep.
How long are they going to allow the players on the field?
Until people fall down. So you just agree with what I said. I told you the Pac-12, they make kids go to class, so they actually read about what COVID-19 is. And down south, I hear that some of the athletes thought that COVID-19 was a libation. Big C, that's just my opinion for some good old boys that I hear. So you're saying Iowa State's in the Big 12, Iowa's in the Big 10, so the Big 10 makes their athletes read and the Big 12 doesn't. College football, although South Alabama and Southern Mississippi, they're generally regarded as historic college football programs. Think about this, Big C. When you think about making history, the Sun Belts, the Jaguars, and the Golden Eagles of Conference USA, they'll take the field on Thursday night for the first college football game of 2020 involving two FBS clubs. Kickoff is set for 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the game is going to be televised on CBS Sports, and they decided to do it even without the help of POTUS. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, when you think about the states, Mississippi and Alabama, both of those states are hotbeds for COVID-19
Sure
going on right now, Charlton, and they still, persisting on playing football. I don't know if they'll have any fans in the stands at those games, Charlton, but this just lets you know that when you look at the science of COVID-19 and how devastating it's been in society, Charlton, so many people are thankless when it comes down to health and welfare of other individuals.
Yeah.
The people that have to go out and play football, Charlton, are not the people making the overall decision.
Yeah.
They're not the ones sitting in the boardroom, wearing the mask, practicing social distancing. I would suggest this, Charlton, that every team, whether it's high school, college, or football,
Yeah.
is that everybody that's in an executive position that's dealing with those schools, Charlton,
Yep.
or those teams,
Yep.
is that they would have to stand amongst the players on the sideline
Me
to
too.
put their health and welfare in peril. That would be my suggestion, and I wish that there was a governing body that could enforce that.
It's interesting. When POTUS was on the airplane, I think he was talking to some people over in Wisconsin for the garbage he's trying to stir up in Wisconsin. And I noticed some of the people, his Secret Service men, they were actually wearing a mask, but he was not wearing a mask. The guys who were designed to protect his life, they wore a mask so they don't get their families infected, but he didn't wear a mask. And I know when you make that statement, I think it's something that maybe would make much more sense. If you are a college president or if you're an administrator and you're saying you want to have football, and if you're these TV stations that want to broadcast these football games, put your broadcast crew together in the studio. Don't put the plexiglass between them, and put your money where your mouth is. Do you think there's a possibility that will happen, Big C? Your thoughts?
Charlton, we've seen where it hasn't happened yet. You've seen many games in basketball and baseball broadcasts, and you have plexiglass sitting between the
Yep.
broadcast crews. You don't have all the full production in the booth that you would normally have, your spotters and things. Everybody's social distancing from each other. But, I look at how they put all the athletes in peril.
Yeah.
But yet nobody's willing to risk that. We see television shows all the time where everybody's on Zoom broadcast, Charlton,
All
but
the
they're
time.
not in a studio together sitting across from each other.
Yeah.
And if they are sitting across from each other, there's 7 to 8 feet between them.
Yep.
So they practice social distancing. They're no longer shoulder to shoulder like they once were. They show that they trust the science on COVID-19.
Yeah.
They don't give a damn about what happens to the athlete.
Yeah, it's almost like someone arguing, why do I got to wear a helmet on a motorcycle? Why do I have to wear a seatbelt? It's restricted. I hate what the government's doing, have to wear a seatbelt in a car or a helmet for a motorcycle. People are just sometimes a little bit crazy. When I think about this, though, the Pac-12, the marquee program, I would say academically, is Stanford. And for the Big Ten, the marquee program academically is Northwestern. And all they're doing is aligning themselves with the same science that the Ivy League did, as well as the HBC college programs. They've all taken the time to put science over money. And even when I saw a guy like a Paul Feinbaum that talks a lot about Southern football, Big C, and he takes both sides of the fence. He won't just say as dumb because he has to sit down and have libations with those guys down in the South, those coaches, etc. But even Feinbaum, as much as he's pushing for football, he's not going to be down on the field with Nick Saban. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, no, he's not. Paul Feinbaum is in an individual studio, Charlton, when he's doing his broadcast. He can always be an advocate for SEC football. He's an advocate for all college football, Charlton, because you have to look at all these broadcasters. The money that they make, a lot of it is relegated on the games that they broadcast. They get extra money on top of their contract generally for the games that they broadcast.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that they're looking not to miss when they have the studio shows, when they have the on-campus shows. They're looking at their bottom line. They're not concerned about the health and welfare of the athletes. And you have to listen to them when they're doing the shows. At no point are they talking about their concerns about the health and welfare of the student athletes.
No.
They're talking about the game should be played and that the guy is safer on campus than he would be at home. If he's safer on campus in
then
the SEC, why is doctors in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, saying potentially the whole student body at the University of Alabama will be infected by the end of the fall?
Yeah, that's because doctors read. And most of them came out of the Pac-12. We'll take the Big C pause, also known as the Big C timeout, and we'll be back in just a moment. All right, we are back from the Big C timeout, also known as the Big C pause. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. There's so many apps that you can follow Big C Sports on, and I really do appreciate the way things are growing with Big C Sports. I'm going to tell you something that I've always told you something would happen, and you would always say, no, it's never going to happen, Charlton. I say, don't say never, Big C. It doesn't make any sense to say never. I want the whole universe to listen to this. California reparations, especially for the people pushing Black Lives Matter, whether you're at Levi Stadium on a flag where you won't give a black man a job at quarterback to get his job back, but you hold up the flag, or whether it's some of the basketball teams that have it on the floor, where people run around on the floor saying Black Lives Matter. What does it really mean? Well, California reparations, the legislature, the Senate bill 3121, it passed. It passed at the end of August, I think on the 31st, in California, signed by the California Senate, signing by Governor Gavin Newsom. It's landmark legislation that will sweep the United States of America. And it's so important as we talk about Black Lives Matter and reparations and what does it really mean. Big C, this is going to be where it's like HR 40, but it's a little bit different. They're studying reparations, how to do it for descendants of slaves, and I think the stipulation is that your family had to be here before the Civil Rights Movement, but it's happening because the state of California, once California goes first, everybody follows. Big C, your thoughts?
But you missed the point, Charlton. Reparation was already paid out. Reparation was paid out at the end of slavery. It was paid out to all the slave owners at that time. They were all paid $785 per slave that they lost. So the United States government, back at the end, in the abolishment of slavery, paid reparations. They're not going to go back and pay it twice. They're not going to add on money. I understand all the bills and laws and legislation that they're making, but you can't put people on a list, and this is where it gets confusing. They were here before civil rights. You can bring in people, Charlton, that were brought into the United States after 1900, after 1885. People who came to the United States were not a part of the slavery regime. So the United States government paid reparations. It's on the book. The Treasury Department paid reparations to every slave owner in America, $785 for every slave that they lost. So they paid the reparations. They just didn't pay it to the slaves.
Well, then that's why I agree. I was going to say you're wrong. You're highly wrong. But now that you cleaned it up at the very end, they're talking about the people in the United States of America, African Americans, American descendants of slaves, called ADOS. California welcomes the Senate passage of AB 3121. I want everyone to Google it. And when you realize it, by the governor of California, the most powerful state in the union, when those lawmakers get together, it's not for people to say, oh, it's never going to happen, and how are they going to do it? Because the smartest people in California are saying it's going to happen, and I'm proud of all the hard work that's gone into it, and they're going to figure out a way to do it the same way they figured out with Truman how to pay for the rebuilding of Europe, called the European Reconstruction Act, Big C. So I'm proud of that. I think if they gave an annuity for African Americans, even if they had an annuity, the state still keeps the money. The annuity is paid out to the descendants, and that's going to be part of how they put it together. And I'm going to be part.
But it comes down to this point: how do you define the descendants of slaves? How are you going to do the genealogical research to find out who is actually a direct descendant of slaves, Charlton? That's where it gets really dicey now when we think about 150 years since slavery has ended in America and the many generations that have come along since then. And the direct descendants are those somebody who married somebody, Charlton, who came from slavery, and they married somebody who never came from slavery. How are they going to define that? And is there going to be a percentage breakdown if they ever get to that point of that genealogical search?
Well, since you never believed in reparations that Governor Gavin Newsom signed, you really don't need to know how they're going to do it, but they're going to do it.
Well, no, I know. It's not that I didn't believe in reparations, Charlton. I knew about reparations. I knew that reparations had been paid to slave owners. At the end of slavery, Charlton, when they had the Emancipation Proclamation, the United States government paid reparations to the slave owners. So it's not that I didn't believe in reparations. Reparations had already been in existence. It's just how do you go back and define now, Charlton, that $785 at the end of reparations, Charlton, not reparations, but the Emancipation Proclamation. What is that $785 worth? And then do you give it to that individual, to that one family, or do you give it to every member in that family? Because the slave owners receive that per slave. And so now do you go back and get every descendant of that slave, or do you go back and find one person of that descendant of that slave and give it to them?
Well, it's for smart minds to figure out, Big C, the same way they figured out how to pay for the Marshall Plan. They didn't put a lot of thought into it. They just signed the bill and they paid out money to rebuild Europe. You don't make it too hard. They've already done it for white people, Big C. They'll just copy the same blueprint. And one more thing I want to touch on, because it's so important, because there's so many people that say that black people are the last hired, the first fired. I heard Val Demings was talking today about how embarrassed he was that William Barr is the state's top attorney, the state's top law official, and he doesn't even understand what reparations is or what slavery does to help build America to become a global power, Big C. It's so important that no one has to know what the solution is going to look like now. No one really knows what the solution looks like for COVID-19, but scientists are working feverishly to figure it out. They don't say, well, we don't know the end results yet, so let's forget about it. They're putting their minds to work, and they're using the Marshall Plan that Truman already did. He just paid white people instead, and no one complained about it. And I'm proud of that happening for African Americans, for everyone that's been pushing for reparations against people saying, oh, it's never going to happen. How are they going to figure it out? They don't ask you to be a part of the solution, but it's going to happen for black Americans.
When you think about that, Charlton,
yeah,
and you think about how much money the United States allocates around the world every year, not just for the Marshall Plan, but to all these countries around the world where the United States gives billions of dollars to all these countries around the world, and they give it away freely, Charlton,
yeah,
to help these struggling countries rebuild and all that. Yet you have your own people within this country, Charlton, that have struggled forever, and yet you choose not to give it to them. Every president that has been along has had an opportunity. When you talk about Truman rebuilding Europe with the Marshall Plan, he knew that the Negroes were struggling in America. Did he do anything for them? No. And no president since him, Charlton, has decided that we're going to give reparations and rebuild the Negro community in America.
What?
So, I mean, regardless of who we have in the White House, it still has to go through the Senate. The Senate has the power of the purse. The United States Senate has the power of the purse. And as long as those old eugenic white men are in the Senate, Charlton, and controlling that, the power of the purse is in their pocket. They're not going to go into their pocket and see a black person walking down the street and say, you know, you deserve socially and economic equality. Here, take half of my income.
Well, that's what you failed to understand. The California State Senate just passed what you said will never happen. August 31st, Google it, Big C. I want to go back to college football real quick, because just like I've been telling so many people, and what some of the lawyers that I've worked with at the state capitol here in California, they don't think like the mainstream population. They're the people who set law. When it happens in California, it will sweep the country, and everybody knows that. But the college football, a little bit different. That may or may not sweep the country. There's a college football rule changes for 2020 with new COVID-19 protocols. They're saying that instant replay time, there's a time limit for that. There's a new expectation that the replay official will take no more than 2 minutes to complete any review. Sometimes it takes 5 now. And players can wear a medical mask made of cloth that is attached to the face mask below the eye area, protecting the long snapper, and that the defensive player could no longer align themselves within the body frame of the long snapper. Now, this is kind of silly to me, but officials will use electronic whistles attached to the waist, and officials will wear a solid black face mask. Officials will be tested weekly for COVID-19, but players can smash into each other for 3 hours without being tested. Big for your thoughts.
Well, you're normally going to protect officials, Charlton. They're generally a little older than the players. I like the rule where you're protecting the long snapper. For years, long snappers have been in peril, Charlton, because you had players crashing into them, and they had the head between their legs, snapping the ball back to the holder for the kicker, Charlton. I love the injection of the replay rule of 2 minutes, because if we watch all levels of
takes
football,
too long.
College and professional, where they take, you take 4 or 5 bathroom breaks, go make yourself a grilled cheese sandwich, come back and they haven't made a decision. So I like that rule, and hopefully they'll implement that one in the NFL. You can't take more than 2 minutes, otherwise the play stands.
Yeah, it stands. And think about this, too. College football, as Iowa cut sports and staff from its football, think about it. Their assistant coaches are still getting pay raises as they cut the staff of faculty. According to an open records request by the Des Moines Register in Iowa, the salary cuts imposed on Iowa assistants are more than offset by the programs, the way they built in their contracts. The raises range from $40,000 to $90,000 for each of the 10 assistants on the team. In total, $575,000 to cut Iowa's assistant salaries. Does that make any sense? They're cutting salaries for administrators, but giving raises to the coaches, and they're not even playing sports. Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, it was something that was built into that contract, and that pay raise, they're getting it was something that's in writing. When they went across the board at the universities and put in pay cuts for all the administration, Charlton, the pay cut was on the salary that they had at that point, not the future salaries, and that's where these clauses in these football contracts kick in. This is the reason why you have great agents when they put these clauses in your contract where things are escalating and you don't have to go back in and renegotiate every year. So that you look at what they're cutting as far as with the university, they're going to cut $520,000 from the salaries of the coaches. But with the bonuses and the pay increases, Charlton, it comes up to $570,000. So no coach is losing money on that football team.
That's like Will Barr saying, there's no racism in America. Are black and white people treated differently? Yeah, but there's no racism. Some people say, what did he just say? It's the same thing happened with football. College football week 1 starts Thursday, September 3rd, and ends September 6th, with a total of 9 games being played, and we still haven't figured out, is it safe or is it not? We know it's not safe, but the people who are making the decision to play, they're not going to be anywhere close to those athletes. Big C, your thoughts?
But there's still no unilateral COVID-19 protocol, Charlton. When you think about some of the smaller universities that are playing, they don't have the financial wherewithal to deal with where the Power 3 conferences that are still playing to have the financial support to protect their athletes, to get consistent COVID-19 testing and be able to have the expertise on their staff that these larger schools have.
Yeah. Well, we know it's just a matter of watching these kids go out there. The shame in it, Big C, is we haven't even had football yet. I think as we mentioned in the first game, we already had the game last week, but no one really knew about it. So much for missing football. The game's already kicked off and nobody even thought about it. Now we have another game kicking off on Thursday night, and everybody's going to do whatever they can to watch or get whatever entertainment they can. I don't know what's going to happen, because I do believe as players do become ill, they're going to tell them, it's going to tell them it's something else. They're not going to say it's COVID-19. They're just going to say it's related to something else. And I have a fear that's going to happen, and that's a shame. But I'm not the one out there making the $1 billion by having guys play. I want to jump to the NBA and Major League Baseball, because as players seem to be targeting more opponents, more and more potentially causing injury, what should the leagues do in taking on new discipline policies? You can only find somebody so much money. It's just part of the machismo in the game, but can they do any more than fines and suspensions? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I think they're going to have to make the suspensions more stern, and you're going to have to put a standard suspension in writing as well as a fine when we think about what players are doing to opponents. And you look at Aroldis Chapman last night throwing at one of the the Tampa Rays players, and he threw it his head, Charlton. Threw a 101-mile-an-hour fastball. That's something that could kill somebody potentially, at least give them brain damage.
Yeah.
And he threw directly at the player's head. And you think about over the last couple seasons that they've hit each other 19 times in games, the Rays and the Yankees.
Yeah.
That's an excessive amount, Charlton. That's some intentional intent when you're looking at that. You go to the NBA bubble and you look at Marquise Morris and what he's done to Luka Doncic.
Yeah.
I know he was fined by the NBA $35,000, so Aroldis Chapman got a 3-game suspension, Charlton. But the NBA and the MLB have not done enough to deter players from doing these heinous acts to their opponents. And so I think it should go in right down, put it in writing, a 5-game suspension along with a $100,000 fine. And maybe that will deter players, Charlton, because the games that you're suspended from, you don't get paid.
Yeah.
And then you get another fine tacked on top of that. Sportsmanship is what we always talk about in sports. But when you have certain players getting to that point, Charlton, and we saw Marquise Morris do it twice to Luka Doncic, that's intentionally trying to injure somebody. And then what Aroldis Chapman did, that ball didn't get away from him, Charlton. Baseball pitchers are too good. He threw directly at the player's head.
You don't give him even the benefit of the doubt of maybe it just slipped out of his hand. I mean, sometimes if the ball does slip away, Big C, your thoughts?
Yeah, it slipped right where he was throwing it, Charlton. I mean, that ball went on a line. I mean, here's a guy, if that ball had been 103 miles an hour, the batter would have not been able to get out of the way, Charlton. And we don't know what type of catastrophic health injury that he may have had.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I was a pitcher one time when I was younger, and the ball slipped out of my hands a couple of times, but I don't know. Everybody has their own perception about that. Also, Major League Baseball. I told you in San Francisco, down in Santa Clara, they wouldn't give Colin Kaepernick a chance to earn his job or compete for his job because he stood up for Black Lives Matter, and he stood up for liberty and justice for all, and he stood up for all the stuff that we see right now where people have been marching all over the world for equality and to end this systemic racism. And for the San Francisco 49ers not to even understand that means they were part of the problem, Big C. But I want to stay in San Francisco. Major League Baseball, the Giants versus the Colorado Rockies. The Giants, they scored, I think, 8 of the 9 innings in their game over Colorado last night. And they blasted enough home runs, and they just beat this team to a pulp. And this is a team that when Bochy retired, they thought maybe they would be in the abyss. They've been kind of a hit-and-miss team, but that's a good baseball team. And you know what? They scored more runs last night than they ever had when Barry Bonds. No one's looking at steroids. Your thoughts?
Well, when you look at what the Giants did last night in a 23-2 victory over the Colorado Rockies, Charlton, they scored 23 runs.
Yep.
That's the most runs that the Giants have ever scored in San Francisco since moving out from Brooklyn in 1958. So when you're talking about hot bats in a ballpark, I mean, they put up some numbers last night that were astronomical, and realistically, it looked like a football score. They may have scored more points last night than the 49ers scored in their first game.
Yeah, I know that the Giants have, I think, the most beautiful ballpark in Major League Baseball, and everybody has their own opinion about that. But I really do love San Francisco and so many things. It would be nice, now that the Raiders are left, the Oakland A's have been doing well in the American League. It'd be nice to see the Giants getting back on top, at least competing with the Dodgers, 7-time defending Western Conference champions. Big C, Denver Nuggets, when we look at NBA playoffs, the playoffs in the bubble really are a lot better than I thought. The Denver Nuggets eliminated the Utah Jazz last night, and it was game 7, which was phenomenal. They won 80-78. It was the lowest scoring game in the bubble thus far, but the Jazz had a chance to win it on a 3-point basket, and it went in and came out, Big C. But just what an amazing game. This reminds me of low-scoring basketball like back in the 80s, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, it looked like a college game in many ways when you think about a score and the winner has 80 points. But, you think about, here's Jamal Murray in his last 3 games who was averaging 47 points a game.
Yeah.
And that's what Denver had in the first half of that game. You think about Denver being held to just 30 points in the second half, Charlton. That's a really low number, 30 points. And Jokic had 33 in the game by himself, the center for the Denver Nuggets. I mean, this was a game that took you back to 80s basketball where it was physical, it was slow down, and not a lot of points scored. But when you have two players in a series that have scored 50 points twice in this series,
yeah,
the expectations was much higher. But what it got to was what everybody likes to hear in a playoff series, Charlton, Game 7.
Yeah.
And it got to Game 7. It didn't have the electricity or the anticipation that everybody was expecting, Charlton, but nevertheless, it had a dramatic finish.
Yeah, and I won't touch on, congratulations, Denver, moving on. And I won't mention the final score of the Heat and the Bucks, but I'm telling you, there's so much good basketball being played right now down in the bubble. Look forward to it. But I want to get on a game that's starting right as we came on the air. If you look at the Houston Rockets and you look at the OKC Thunder, Big C, in the playoffs, the Houston Rockets, they're 0-5 in their last 5 closeout playoff games. And I think Coach D'Antoni's 0-6 in his last 6 closeout games. I'm not one for calling coaches being replaced. I think he's a fine coach. And last I checked, he never went up and down the court shooting baskets. But James Harden, to me, he's the best player on that team. Maybe one of the top 3 or 4 players in the Western Conference. Maybe one of the top 6 of all of the NBA. If the Rockets win tonight, I would like to see him dribbling the ball up and down the court. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, he's 69 years old. But, when you look at James Harden, Charlton, and everybody's criticizing Russell Westbrook about what occurred in the last moments of that game, Charlton, it's like going out telling a racehorse not to run when you put him in the starting gate.
Yeah.
Russell Westbrook does what Russell Westbrook does. He's a competitor, plays harder than anybody in the NBA. And that's his Achilles heel as anything else. The Houston team, Charlton, there's not a lot of coordination between the players. When you look at James Harden, when he's not hustling,
yep,
he's not in the game. And that's what people are looking at. He's a great shooter, but at times he takes himself out of the game when he's not hustling. He's become a great assist man now in the NBA. He led the NBA in steals. He's an outstanding defensive player.
Yeah.
But when, he feels he's not getting the ball, he's not hustling, and his teammates are looking at him and not trying to get him in the flow.
Do you believe what they call game management? They've all had game management with COVID-19. They were all shut down for a couple of months. But you can't, he's not like Russell Westbrook. Westbrook he is that Ferrari that runs up and down the court. But if you're D'Antoni, if a player is just not feeling it, that's when you call a timeout. You have him sit on the bench for a couple of series and let him see what you're seeing. And then you put him back in. I think he's going to play much better tonight. But I'm telling you, there's something about this OKC team. They're like the people that came to the party and nobody invited Chris Paul like his State Farm commercials. They were not invited. Nobody really wants them to get there. I don't even think people in Oklahoma City thought they would beat Houston. And I don't know if they will tonight. I think Houston's going to find a way to pull it out. If all Russell Westbrook has to do is play a little bit better than he played last game, and they'll pull it out. But give me your thoughts on Chris Paul. He dropped 28 points last time in Game 6. May not do the same performance tonight that he had in the last game. Your thoughts on what you can expect from Chris Paul, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, Chris Paul got a little dog in him, Charlton, and I mean dog.
Yeah.
He goes out there like a pit bull on the court.
Yeah.
Everybody had washed up on him, when he was in New Orleans. When he left there, he went to the Clippers. Everybody said he was done when he left the Clippers, and he went to the Houston.
Yeah.
He left Houston. They said he was done, that he was a cancer on the team, and that he didn't make his teammates better. He's gone to OKC. There hasn't been any problem, Charlton, with the younger players. I think as players in the NBA get older and guys want to have their own mantle, when you look at the lineup that was there with the Clippers, you had guys who were being marquee players, and they wanted the ball all the time. And Chris Paul has been a consistent point guard, been one of the best point guards his entire career in the NBA, and he's gotten the job done. His injuries last year in Houston is what hurt him when he went down with the hamstring. Up until he went down with the hamstring, they most likely would have won the series. But because he got injured, they said he was the problem with the team, Charlton.
Yeah.
And when he went down, nobody else could carry it. You got to look at James Harden, been there 3 years, and hasn't gotten any farther in the last 3 years in the playoffs than he has. He keeps getting eliminated.
Yeah.
So you can't keep blaming the other players. You got to look at Harden.
Yeah. I think Harden. Well, you're right. Very good point. It's a make or miss league, and guys got to make their shots. Boston Celtics. When I look at Miami, I don't really think that Milwaukee is the number one seed in the East, at least not in the bubble. And I was thinking that maybe Toronto was the number 2 seed, but not because were not better than Milwaukee. I thought they were not better than Boston. And now it looks like Boston is showing. Tatum dropped 34 points. He's still a young man. And it looks like there's something about that leprechaun. I thought they kept leprechauns out of the bubble, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, you got a three-headed monster in Boston, Tatum, Morris, and Brown.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about those young players and then not having to share time with Kyrie Irving,
yeah,
and Gordon Hayward, Charlton, the 2 big money players, free agents that they brought into Boston, and the team seemed to get worse when they were there. If you go back to Boston a couple years ago, Charlton, they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah.
Without those guys, playing all those young players. They took a dive last year when all those players were back, and those young players that Gross was stumped. Now that those players are out of the lineup, and you look at what they've done since Hayward has left the lineup, they've really excelled.
Yeah.
And so these young legs late in the season benefit you a lot more than the older season legs, and that's what we're seeing in the East. I mean, you know, having Toronto down 2-0, I mean, there's no home court advantage, but they still got to play on the same court, and Toronto hasn't been able to do anything with this young team in Boston. Maybe they were living on their laurels just a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And even in Milwaukee, I told you earlier in the year that Giannis will be looking for a house in California. Don't take that off the slate.
Yeah. Well, now that he knows they're about to pass reparations, of course he's going to come to California. He's going to find the second gold rush. It's all fair level war. Make sure you're registered to vote. Tell everybody to get out and vote. Text the word VOTE 26797. That's text the word VOTE to 26797. Tell them Big C in the NFL said vote. And when you have Attorney General William Barr saying that he doesn't believe that racism exists in the United States of America, but he believes that black people and white people are not treated the same. And then Donald Trump says he wants to be drug tested. Does that make any sense? Your thoughts?
Well, you know, Donald Trump is letting you know what it is, but it has to be an independent drug test if Donald Trump is going to be drug tested. He can't be his own doctor because, you know, I mean, you think about when he took his physical when he became the president, and you know, Ronnie Jackson lied and said, you know, Donald Trump was the most physically fit person to ever take the Oval Office in American history.
Yeah. You know, it's so funny when have you ever in your life, like Vern Lindquist when Tucker hit he putted it in from the 16th green and he said, in your life, have you in your life ever heard of a current president saying he wants to be drug tested? Your thoughts?
Well, you know, that lets you know how big a dope that he is, Charlton, when he says that he wants to be drug tested. And this just goes along with the rest of the dog whistles that Donald Trump uses. He's constantly trying to distract people.
Oh,
he's telling people that Joe Biden is on some performance enhancement. That's why he's able to speak so clearly and clairvoyantly, Charlton.
Yeah.
And because he stumbles in all of that,
oh, God.
you know, with what he's trying to get out, and he's putting out all these conspiracy theories. I mean, the last interview that he gave on Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, not on Trump, well, Trump Network, Fox, with Laura Ingraham. I mean, it was one of the most buffoonery interviews that anybody could ever get. I mean, she was spoon-feeding him like a 3-month-old infant the question, and he still couldn't answer the question. It showed us the lack of leadership and intelligence we have in the Oval Office now in the United States.
Yeah. You know, we all know about his Hollywood lifestyle back when he was in the casinos and in the gaming industry, Big C, and he's always sniffing. I know when I watch Scarface, Tony Montana sniffed a lot too. He reminds me of Donald Trump. Drug testing the president of the United States. Make sure it's an independent test, because that's like a baseball player saying test me for HGH. They're not going to ask you to. I mean, it's all fair level war. Big C, final closeout story. I think this is a really bad deal, so I won't talk too much about it. But there's a former NBA player and an owner that wants to take an equity stake in a gambling company. Now, if you're an owner of a team, what are you doing being anywhere near gambling, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that's a faux part. I think the Board of Governors in the NBA are going to have to take a deeper look at that. When you have the owner of a club and he's involved with a gambling organization, independently, Charlton, away from the league, and he was, when he had a gambling problem when he was a player. So I think that's something that the league has to look at, and he's going to have to make a decision whether he wants to be a part of the league, a part of that gambling organization.
Oh, life is so funny. Donald Trump wants to be drug tested. Reparations, the Senate of California have passed Senate Bill 3121, passes in California, signed by Governor Gavin Newsom, will be landmark legislation that will sweep the country. Big C, back in the day, there's a man by the name of Drew Boudini Brown. He was known as Muhammad Ali's right-hand man, and he would always tell Ali, with all you got to use, how can you lose? Rumble, young man, rumble. Big C, what are you looking forward to in this sports universe?
Well, Charlton, as we have college football kickoff tomorrow night in earnest with all the games that are going to be played over the weekend, I wish all the best for those young men that are out there on the field, Charlton, putting their health and welfare in peril and without being paid or compensated for it. And I also want to thank our frontline healthcare workers, our nurses, doctors, our first responders. I know that you'll be first in line if any of these young men come down with any type of illness.
Amen to that. In America, Donald Trump wants to be drug tested. You can be drug tested too every Monday through Friday at 5 and 6 p.m. worldwide. Will you follow Big C Sports on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America? And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C and them good old boys down south. As we always tell you, that's never, ever an excuse for racism or domestic violence. If you know any man, woman, or child going through that garbage, please pick up the phone and ask for help, because no man, woman, or child should ever have to go through that garbage on their own. And as we always tell you on every Big C Sports Show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.